that I
think
could
so.
get this started before I go up and close?
And then,
Should it be live now?
yeah, it takes like 10 seconds to calculate.
Sometimes needs the barrel to more than a lot of time because there's a expansion. I hope that you're flexible in time. And you're obviously doing that.
Yeah. I will still be used to the
I'm going to check this game. Should it work this inside?
Oh, perfect. Ready to net?
Figure that out after.
So, before we get started tonight, I think this is what you call eating crow. I could explain to you the whys and the wherefores of why there is not an interpreter for the audience here tonight, but I understand an explanation doesn't change the fact that there is no interpreter. And I'm horrified. It was my intention and the intention of Access Services Northwest to have interpreters here for the audience tonight. And there was a screw up with emails and addresses, and the short story is the job never got posted, and that's why there are no interpreters here tonight. And by the time we discovered it, it was too late to get interpreters here. And I wish I could crawl in a hole and disappear right now. It was not my intention to create more barriers or more anger or more exclusion. My intention was to make this an inclusive event. And I can tell you what I'm going to do different next time to make sure something like this never happens again when I'm involved. Again, I understand that that doesn't change the fact that there are no interpreters here right now. And from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. All right, well.
So welcome to our third of 4 resistance forums. I am Emily Goldenfields, and I am with the Portland Democratic Socialists of America.
And I'm Kevin Leffler with Portland's Resistance.
Yeah.
It's been an eventful year on the national stage and here in Oregon as well. The unprecedented nature of 2017 contributed to the feeling amongst the sponsoring groups who do not often work together that we should partner on bringing an additional spotlight to some of the most important elections in the region. To that end, and in the spirit of resisting the toxic vitriol our nation's capital is generating, the Democratic Socialists of America Portland chapter, the Multnomah County Democratic Community Action Committee, Portland's Resistance, and the Oregon Working Families Party are collaborating to bring you the Resistance Forum series leading up to the May 15th primary election.
Tonight's forum will be for the City of Portland Commissioner Position 2. All voters registered by April 24th who reside within the city limits of the City of Portland are eligible to vote in this election. You can check or update your registration with the Multnomah County Elections Office, but any changes must be made by April 24th.
All candidates for this election were invited to participate in the forum, and we're fortunate to have them all here with us this evening. From left to right, we have Philip Wolf, Nick Fish, Nicholas Sutton, and Julia DeGraw.
We are live streaming this forum for community members who are unable to attend in person, or for those who want to view it later to inform their vote. If you have friends or family who would benefit from this conversation, please share the live stream with them on social media.
Our forum tonight will first feature 2-minute opening statements, followed by curated questions that the hosting organizations have agreed upon based on the priorities of their members and constituents. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to questions. We will also have time for questions from the audience and then 90-second closing statements. Due to the extra time needed for interpretation and translation services, Philip will have a bit of additional time to accommodate for that.
To submit a question, fill out an index card and hold it up, and a volunteer will collect the card and pass it to us. You can also submit a question online using the hashtag Resistance Forums on Twitter or by leaving a comment on our Facebook event. Volunteers will be reviewing questions to cover a diversity of topics and a mix between in-person and remote.
We also have a few special rules we've added to our forum. If a candidate criticizes another participant at the moderator's discretion, the participant who is named will have 60 seconds to respond.
And each candidate has also been given 2 tokens for use during the debate. The candidates may use these 2 tokens at any time during the debate to either add 30 seconds to their response or to ask a question of another opponent.
Now let's begin our resistance forum. We will begin with opening statements from each of the candidates. For our statements, we'll go in the order that participants are seated, and then for additional questions, the next person down the line will go first, and we'll proceed in that manner throughout the evening.
So we'll start with an opening statement by Philip Wolf.
Hello, good evening. My name is Philip J. Wolf, and hopefully I will be your future city councilman. And it's what I'm running for tonight, why I'm here this evening. It's a wonderful opportunity. Thank you for having me here. I've been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time, and it's finally here. This is an important historical moment. In the over 100 years that we've had the Oregon City Council, we've never had a deaf person run for any position. So this is a big, important deal in history. Yes, a round of applause for that. So what I hopefully will be talking about tonight, and from the comments that Sandy had made in reference to the mix-up with the interpreters, I just do want to offer some clarification. There was a point during the working out of the accommodations that interpreters were said to be too expensive for the evening, and so on my own, I worked out hiring interpreters, volunteer interpreters for the evening. I understand there was some confusion about the accommodation, and just for myself, making sure that I had equitable access for the evening and for this debate as a candidate, I wanted to be sure that I had interpreters that I trusted for my own personal service. That was worked out, However, I did request that a certified deaf interpreter be provided for the audience, and I was told that a hearing interpreter would be provided instead. I did give the job to the facilitators for the evening because I had already worked out my personal interpretation, and they said, if you wanted ASL interpreters, this is the way it's going to be. So this is the result, unfortunately, this evening, that members of our audience tonight will not have accommodations, and this is the exact reason why I'm running for City Council. Myself, as a deaf person, I experience barriers in my everyday life just making my way through the city. I've lived all over the United States, Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, and there's a myriad of accessibility options in those. But ASL interpreting is one of the worst situations, and actually the city of Portland, as beautiful and wonderful and nature-filled as it is, and as much as I love it and how full of culture it is, the accessibility is still a huge, huge barrier for most of our community. So we're looking to prioritize changes in the community and bring that access to those people first and foremost. I do have 5 different just quick platforms that I hope that I'll be able to address. Number 1 being police reform. As many of you all know, I myself am very passionate about police reform, very hands-on about working directly with the police and addressing a number of issues within policing. The second platform is the houselessness issue in Portland. 358 people died on the streets from the cold, harsh weather in 2015, and this is a serious concern for me that needs addressing immediately. This isn't a spoon-feed, Band-Aid kind of situation. This is a person by person by person fix and finding a home for everybody in our city. The third platform is accessibility to mental health services, making sure that the appropriate services are being provided. Fourth is traffic reform is a recent interest of mine. I know that we have a $500 million traffic expansion bill, and it's very, very serious opposition on my end to that. So just to sort of wrap up, I'm really looking forward to this evening, sharing comments with all of you and the dialogue with that. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me from this distance?
No, I can't hear you. I'm sorry, Nick, if you could speak up. I can't hear you right now. I'm just kidding. I got him good. You got it.
Philip is my friend, and he comes to City Council regularly and holds us accountable, so I'm honored to be on the stage with him. So my name is Nick Fish, and I want to begin by thanking our hosts for organizing this event. This is the first forum in which the 4 of us have appeared together. And I think, Julie and I were talking earlier, I think there may only be 2 other opportunities for people to see us together. And I have my own view about how that furthers our democracy. I mean, by this time in prior elections, we've already had forums on housing, on the environment, on small business. And I know these things strap the capacity of organizations to host. So can we give a round of applause to our hosts who put this together? Thank our moderators. So this is like a job interview. So let me tell you a few things about me. For 20 years, my family has lived in Northeast Portland in the Grant Park neighborhood. And a little over a year ago, we decided to sell our house. Our daughter had moved on, and we now have a 14-year-old at home. And we decided to sell our house and take a rental apartment downtown so that my wife and I could walk to work. I obviously work at City Hall. I'm the incumbent. My wife teaches women's studies at Portland State University. And she's the first professor of women's studies. And the reason that we came to Oregon was she got a job offer. And Patty is the first woman on her mother's side of the family to go to high school. But this was a big deal. Why am I running? This city faces enormous challenges. Obviously, Trump would have to be at the top of the list, but rising inequality, homelessness, affordable housing, threats to our environment, police accountability, racial justice, declining trust in government, we all have our lists of what those challenges are. The question is, what's the case that each of us can make as to why we can be part of the solution? For me, it's very simple. I love this city. And my family has done very well here, and I'm running because I think I have the experience, the relationships, and the progressive values to move our city forward during a very challenging time. And again, I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you.
Sutton.
Hi, this is my first attempt at running for any political office. I hope it's not the last. I am running specifically as a result of my decision during the election of our current president. For the last year, I have felt a sickness in the pit of my stomach that such a terrible event could occur. My decision to run for city council, however, is specific to the issues which affect me and many of the people I work with and live around. Every year, the cost of living continues to rise, and it is out of control. I live month to month in constant fear that I will be, like the many people on the streets, joining them. This problem is unacceptable. We have to find a new way of approaching this issue. To that end, I'm hoping to address the primary issue of housing costs, housing prices, or, if possible, the raising of the minimum wage, which I do know is on the rise and will continue to rise, but at a pace that we cannot afford. I'm here to lend a voice to those people, like myself, who are constantly living in fear that we will not be able to afford to live in the city we love any longer. Secondly on that are, of course, the issue of houselessness, which is an issue that I have already expressed. I live in constant fear of having to one day face. This issue has been addressed by the city. This issue has been addressed by the city in marginally. I feel it has not been approached with the degree of urgency that it truly needs. I'm here with the hope of convincing people that maybe we can go in a new direction and find someone who, maybe a normal person, who lacks maybe some of the experience that, these people are having hold, but considers these issues important because they are dear to him personally. Thank you.
Julia DeGraw.
I would like to start by thanking the hosts for pulling together this forum. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to all these folks tonight. And I also want to thank everyone for turning out for this. My name is Julia DeGraw, and I'm running for Portland City Council because it is past time for the city to prioritize the needs of people over developer profits, corporate interests, and complacent politicians. And I have a track record of winning on behalf of people, as most recently the Northwest organizer at Food and Water Watch, where I fought for 9 years to stop a Nestle water bottling facility from being built in the Columbia River Gorge to bottle our publicly owned water. And now I'm ready to bring that fight to Portland City Hall for all of you. Business as usual in City Hall isn't working for most Portlanders. Our wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. Housing costs are going through the roof. And the quality of life has gotten worse for a lot of folks in our city over the last decade. But I want all of the people in this room and all the people who are listening to join me in creating a bold new future for our city. A future in which everyone who needs a home has one. A future in which working people can be guaranteed a living wage. A future in which children are guaranteed access to clean air and clean water. And a future in which we have permanent net neutrality and municipal broadband for every Portlander. And together I want to work with communities from across the city to dismantle our Portland's Jim Crow era at-large election system. To replace it with a city council districting system to create equitable representation for every person in this city. Right now, all but one city commissioner lives in Southwest Portland. And living east of 82nd Avenue, if I were elected tomorrow, I would be the only elected official on council to live east of Cesar Chavez Boulevard. I want to wrap up my statement by thanking some of my endorsers. The Portland Community College, the Portland Community College faculty and staff unions have both endorsed my campaign, as has Bill McKibben, the co-founder of 350.org, Bernie PDX, Our Revolution Portland, and Skipper Osborne, the former president of NAACP of Portland. And I would just like to wrap up really quickly by saying I'm proud to say I will not accept any contributions from corporations, to make it abundantly clear that I stand with the people of this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll be moving to our prepared questions. And our first question will be for Nick Fish. And then we'll move down the line. So the first question is, what is your stance on taking money from corporations to fund your campaign?
Well, thank you for the question. And let me begin by saying that we have a problem with money in politics. There's too much money in politics, and probably the worst Supreme Court decision of my lifetime was the Citizens United decision, which opened the floodgates to unlimited money from corporations and unlimited so-called dark money, which is unregulated money that continues to pollute our political system. So I believe that there are ultimately we're going to need to have measures to reduce the influence of money in politics. And we need to magnify the voice of ordinary people. Now, under current law, companies in Oregon can contribute to political campaigns. And so I have received contributions in my campaign from small businesses in Portland, from B Corps, from gallery owners, from people that are part of the small business ecosystem. I have not taken a lot of money from that sector. The largest single source of funding for my campaign has come from working men and women through their unions. The largest chunk by far is from labor. But the question is, going forward, how do we get our hands around the amount of money in politics? I think it's, in the long term, in our interest to think about amending the Constitution. Because as long as the First Amendment is interpreted as giving unlimited right to give money, I think we have to carve out in the First Amendment, in our state constitution, that corporations are not people for purposes of speech and donations. And I think that's a reform that has to be considered. But under the current system, my money that I take comes from individuals as well as from small businesses. I will spend in this race about half of what the new public financing system for the city that's been established has set as the amount you can spend in a primary. And I believe generally there's too much money in politics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nick Fish. Next, Nicholas Sutton. Same question.
My stance on the issue is I simply will not do it. Granted, I don't think any company or corporation is going to willingly give me money due to my stance on raising the minimum wage. However, I feel that as a leader, as a politician, the first step in changing this is to simply start by changing the way we behave, changing the way we act. In doing this, I feel other politicians will be pressured into following suit. As a representative of the people of Portland, the people of Portland are my first and primary concern, and I will not allow any other organization to stand in the way of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas Sutton. Julia DeGraw.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, I am refusing to accept any contributions in my campaign from corporations. And as someone who's challenging an incumbent politician in an at-large election, as I mentioned earlier, that means I do have to run a citywide election against a candidate who has significantly more resources than I do in order to win. But I thought it was really, really important to stand by my values. I spent my career fighting the corporate interests, fighting Nestle and Monsanto and these large corporations that have done a lot of damage to human beings' lives. And I'm refusing to accept money from those entities because I think it's really important that our actions match our values. And so I am really relying on the support of the unions that will endorse my campaign and the individuals who are inspired by what I'm doing here. And what we're really doing, and what I'm doing, is trying to build a movement in the city that shows the establishment politics that we can actually win elections with people who support candidates and not with big money in politics. That said, I strongly support changing the laws so that we can have real campaign finance reform, first at the state level, because it's clear we're not going to be getting that at the federal level anytime soon. But for now, I'm just going to set the example of not accepting corporate contributions in this campaign.
Thank you, Julia DeGraw. And Philip Wolf.
Yes, thank you. So I'll go ahead. I don't need a repetition on the question or anything. So I don't want to make anything longer than saying no. I will not accept any corporate money. I have worked for corporations in the past. I worked for Starbucks. I've worked for a number of businesses in my time, and I've seen the corruption. I've seen the mishandling of money. I've seen the low and unfair wages. I've seen little to no benefits. I've seen low quality of work, and I've been through a myriad of workplaces, and I've had enough of that. So the first thing that I really want to focus on is on a local level. And sadly, we live in a corporate world. We can see the effects of that corporate world in our city here. And so we need to make a knowledgeable, informed choice on how we can get rid of that corporate takeover and start endorsing our small businesses, our mom and pop coffee shops, and those local businesses and those people that are here. Those people for the people. So very simple answer is no, I will not. And I know that Multnomah County have been in talks with them. There is a new proposal for candidates receiving $100 or less per a limit on how much people are allowed to give to each candidate to make it fair, because maybe income for their supporters is unequal. So making sure that that's a balance in how people are allowed to personally endorse candidates. And that's a policy that is not passed yet, but if I were to be elected, is something that I would follow through with and hopefully set up something like that systematically in the past. So simple answer, no corporate money.
Thank you, Philip Wolf.
For our second question, Nicholas Sutton will start. As a city commissioner, how will you work to ensure that as our economy transitions to renewable energy sources, our workers in carbon-intensive industries aren't left behind?
This is an issue I have actually been thinking on for some time, long before I even considered running for any office. As I sat across the street from the neighborhood I grew up in, and I noticed that the buildings around me were all new. Everything that had been built when I was a child disappeared and been replaced by something new. Now, those new buildings weren't always up to date with renewable energy sources, but I came to the conclusion that time is the best possible way to address this. And you do this by, as far as I'm concerned, changing the regulations to require a certain degree of renewable energy resources, so that over the course of, say, 50 to 100 years, the city will be fully up to date in generating its own power, particularly residential areas, given time and proper regulation. Sorry about that. I think we can achieve this dynamically. organically, that's the word I was looking for, sorry, without any particularly heavy push in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Julia DeGrasse, same question.
So I have to say, I'm really excited about the 100% renewable resolution that the city passed. It was a pretty historic moment when the city and the county both passed the 100% renewables by 2050. And I am really concerned about making sure we actually meet those goals, right? So that's where the rubber meets the road. And we absolutely need to make sure that as we transition to 100% renewables, that we're doing so in a way that's equitable and that's creating jobs for folks, right? And I think what's really exciting is we have this just transition ballot measurements coming up that I think will help us get it right as we transition to a clean energy future. We can make sure that not only are we creating jobs, but we're creating jobs in underserved communities and for folks who have been usually left out of like these economic booms, right? So making sure women and minorities are supported through strong community benefits agreements and as we transition to a clean energy future. And I think that there's this mythology that's floating around right now about how we can't have a clean environment and transition to clean energy and have jobs. And it's just not true. We can have a new Green Deal. We just have to make it happen. We have to put the resources into it. But there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't have a green, clean energy future for our city and be really equitable and thoughtful in how we create those jobs and make it happen so it benefits all of us in the entire community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia DeGrasse. Philip, same question.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a really important question because of right where we live. We live on Mother Earth all together. We can watch our planet suffer before our eyes, unfortunately, and we are the ones who are to blame, myself included. As a human being, I am part of that. But I know that that means I'm also part of the change, and it has to start with me. It has to start on an individual level, working with people. So, for example, a forum like this, following the example of that, and what others are doing in their work. I fully endorse renewable energy. That being said, that energy and the changes and the transitions that we make are not only going to be providing jobs for the typical community, but for our LGBT members, for our people of color, for our disabled community, and for all of our communities, for men and women, any race and any background, and making sure that we're making this an equitable change for Portland and not just for the white working class. I know that we did have a conversation relating to, I'm sorry, the interpreter is clear. Fine. So I want to ban fossil fuel energy and all of the smog and the unclean energy sources that we're using here in Portland. I want to be sure that we're supporting green energy, but also getting rid of those resources appropriately, because there are some green energy that uses resources that are not themselves green. So making sure that we're not just doing one thing and saying, all right, we did that one thing and it looks good, but we're really getting down, because there are things that we can do and there are things that we can do much, much better too.
Philip, well, thank you. Nick Fish, same question.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, before I was in public life for 20 years, I was a labor lawyer and a civil rights lawyer, and I represented working people. And I represented a union called 1199 that represents healthcare workers, and I did work for the Teamsters and the UAW. And so my values are very anchored in the labor movement, and I'm very proud in this race that janitors and Teamsters and construction workers, firefighters, and teachers and city workers have all endorsed me. But they've endorsed me because I bring a set of values to my work. And let's talk about, the heart of the question that you've asked is, can we form a blue and a green coalition to move forward together? And that's a question. And I'll tell you where that question was called recently. It's when the city took up a fossil fuel infrastructure ban. And City Hall was divided right down the middle. On one side were environmentalists saying, let's leave the country in saying no to fossil fuels and clean energy future. On the other half of City Hall were people in hard hats saying, but those are our jobs. We cannot allow this to be a zero-sum game. We have to be able to make the case that by moving to a clean energy future, we are going to have high-wage jobs for everybody, and that includes our blue-collar people that feel like they're going to be left behind. And I can tell you that in time after time, when we've had these big debates at City Hall, we don't often hear about the working people that are going to be disrupted in the short term. And for those of us who subscribe both to a set of labor values and to a clean energy future, we have got to merge blue and green. And if we do so, humbly, we'll have the most powerful coalition on this and any other issue going forward. But we must be intentional, and I see the stop sign. So I'll say one way we're intentional is through community benefits agreements, which make sure that the jobs stay here. We do that through Superfund and other things. But to my environmental friends, we cannot have a rift between blue and green and continue to move forward as a city. Thank you.
And thank you for the question.
Okay, the next question will be, I'm going to begin with Julia DeGraw. The 400 richest billionaires in the U.S. collectively own more wealth than the bottom 64% of the U.S. population. Is there an amount of wealth that you think one person owning is too much? Should there be billionaires?
Wow, that is quite the question. We live in a world in which the only way an individual can accrue that amount of wealth is on the backs of working people and exploiting human beings and the environment. There's just no way that that much wealth can be accrued in one place other than to exploit people. And we absolutely should live in a country that has a progressive tax that makes it very, very hard, if not impossible, for individuals to achieve that level of wealth. And the reason why is because there are working people, and there are people in this city, and there are people across this country who have to make a decision about whether or not they can put food on the table or cover their medical bills. There's people who are working more than one job who can't afford to cover their rent. You know, people on a daily basis are forced to make decisions about what they're going to do with the tiny amount of money that they have, while we have other members in our society that have opulent wealth, more money than they could ever possibly spend. And that money has to be, and they're only doing that by exploiting human beings. And so I would say that we absolutely need to have a policy of taxing the wealthiest among us and taxing corporations at a higher rate so we can have actual revenue streams to provide people with services that they need and require and ensure that people, working people especially, can make ends meet. There's absolutely no reason that this economy shouldn't be thriving and that money shouldn't be flowing around within our communities rather than ending up in the coffers of billionaires.
Thank you, Julia DeGraw. Philip Wolf.
Yes, this is a continuous question that I actually asked myself just as a community person in Portland watching the wage and wealth disparity grow more and more and more. And at the same time, we can see the gentrification and the raising cost of living in Portland all compounding into one big problem. So in setting a limit in terms of how much money someone should have, I don't really want to be the one that sets a cap on exactly what that rule says. You have enough. In my mind, a person does have enough to have the right and the opportunity to work hard and earn proportionate, but I think that we have many, many leaders who are corrupt. We have a history of corruption within most of our systems, and that history speaks for itself. And it comes down to taxing the rich. It comes down to taxing the rich. And so this means specifically, just to clarify, if a rich person, for example, doesn't feel like, they don't want to go through the paying of the taxes and having to follow that, we may have something like an incentive. If you are willing to pay a tax, if you're willing to provide money for people for the services that they need, for example, our houseless population, we can get just a little bit of money from a bunch of those Maybe we can bring up tax breaks, and maybe we can bring up other policies and other ideas that encourage people to spread that wealth and send it where it needs to, instead of selfishly sort of sitting on the piles of income that they may have. And hopefully Portland can then become an example of something that can cause ripples through the country. So setting an actual value is not so much, but the taxing of the rich is what's important in that.
Thank you, Philip Wolf. Nick Fish?
Thank you. Well, look, we all know that we have extreme and obscene inequality in our country. And the Trump tax cut that gave $1.5 billion to people and corporations that didn't need it is an example of exactly the wrong priorities in our country. And I don't know any billionaires. And my family is solidly middle class. But the reality is, our tax policy has consequences. So let's take the Trump tax cuts. And even Warren Buffett had the courage to say that it was a tax cut that he didn't need and felt was inappropriate for people in his station in life. In order to pay for this tax cut, the president has just put out a budget in which he has proposed to eliminate funding for affordable housing in this country, because he has to pay for a tax cut. So no more funding for community development block grants, no more money for home. He has proposed to eliminate the funding for maintaining the capital infrastructure of our public housing, which means our most vulnerable people living in housing that the federal government doesn't want to maintain. Our tax policy is upside down because our values are upside down. We spend $40 billion at the federal level providing housing subsidies for people that have no place to go, the 50 million people living in poverty. We spend $200 billion giving people tax breaks in housing that they don't need. It's upside down. I'm indifferent to the billionaire class, and it's not my scene. I am focused more specifically on our tax structure, which has to be more progressive, repeal the Trump tax cuts, once and for all, get comprehensive tax reform in the state of Oregon, and begin to put people first.
Okay, thank you, Nick Fish and Nicholas Sutton.
To answer the question, I do not believe billionaires should exist. So straightforward. There are people with that problems. There is no justification for that amount of wealth. Period. Ever. Apart from that, over many years, I'd like to introduce a concept. We long ago introduced the concept of a minimum wage. Why can't we start working to introduce the concept of a maximum wage? Tie that wage proportionally to the minimum wage. How long before people are making $20, $30, $40 an hour? Regardless, I personally, I agree that the easiest way to address the problem of billionaires is to approach a progressive tax, where the more you earn, the more you have to pay. That would be the simplest and most direct route. In the long run, I would like to see the billionaire class disappear completely from the face of the planet.
Thank you, Nicholas Sutton.
For our next question, we'll start with Philip Wolf. Do you support sweeps of homeless camps? Would you have swept the Village of Hope?
Yeah, so answer the question with honesty and with no filter and no smudge. Hell no. Hell no do I support police sweeping. I do not support the taking and the Village of Hope sweep that happened. This is a huge part of our houseless issue. This is putting lives of vulnerable people in our communities at risk. This is putting them in situations where they have confrontations with police, where there may be a threat to their physical health. They may be arrested, they may be jailed, their things may be taken. Oh, we'll give you a blanket, they may say, but then have your tent and your house in that moment taken from you. Oftentimes we have city leaders who will say, oh, we definitely care about confronting this issue. But then we have laws that are posted on the streets that say, oh, you can't sleep here, and direct policies that are against our houseless population because they look dirty or it doesn't look nice or they're too tired on the ground or whatever it may be. It just doesn't match the visual standard, and it automatically becomes a bias and a discrimination against our houseless population. So I would love to make police sweeps completely illegal, and in lieu of that, providing resources for people, finding specifically what they need, calling medical services and support if they need it, instead of kicking people to get them to wake up and grab their stuff. I mean, I've seen it myself. I've filmed it multiple times with how police handle the houseless people in our community, and it's completely unacceptable. So I would ban police sweeping, and I would remove all of the signs that directly harass the houseless movement. So this is just my strong answer of no.
Philip Wolf, thank you. Nick Fish, same question.
So the specific question has to do with the Village of Hope, and as everyone here knows, that was a decision made by the mayor and by Commissioner Fritz. The location that the Village of Hope initially chose was at the intersection of parkland and sensitive natural area. We can debate whether it's the right location or not. I have two fundamental concerns with the whole way this debate is framed. I will commit to trying to find a place for the Village of Hope to locate and to determine their own future. When I was the housing commissioner, I entered into a long-term agreement, an operating agreement with Dignity Village, because the model proved successful, and we were flexible in a housing crisis of allowing people to engage in self-help and to step up and solve their own needs. But there's a fundamental problem in this debate that I have as someone who spent 30 years in the housing movement, which is the premise of this question and the questions like it is, have we normalized a situation where people living in tents and in campgrounds is acceptable? Because that's the premise. Have we normalized it? Or are we outraged that that's the choice that people in our community have? And are we committed to a better future? I've never met someone who said they want to live in a tent in a natural area, hassled by police all the time, and feeling under siege. But everybody that I have met and talked to whose households has said they want what I have. They want a roof over their head and they want stability. So are we going to fight over things like sweeps and temporary housing? Or are we going to commit as a community to make sure that everybody has a safe and decent place to call home? And that's where my values live.
What was the question again?
The question was, do you support sweeps of homeless camps, and would you have swept the Village of Hope? Thank you, Nick Fish. Nicholas, same question.
Yeah, this one was of particular interest to me because the Village of Hope seemed to be going in a different direction to approach the issue. In that sense, when you have a complicated issue such as potential damage to critical habitat or other sensitive areas, we do have to take that into consideration. That said, I probably would not have been quick to move against this. I feel the appropriate response would have been to say, okay, we can't have you living here. Let's work together and find somewhere else we can go where everybody can more or less live in peace. I don't think sending police out to deal with the homeless is the way to solve the problem. And I would never willingly approach this unless harm is being caused as a result. So yeah, I would not have swept the village.
Thank you, Nicholas. Julia DeGraaf, same question.
So I would like to start the answer to this question by talking about the leadership failure at City Hall to actually address the houseless issue. The reason why we have a growing number of people that are unhoused in the city is for lack of planning and lack of foresight. The city's been booming for a while. We've done very little to help keep it affordable for people, and people are getting kicked out of their homes. And of course, we don't want to normalize houselessness and people living in tents. But if the city doesn't have somewhere safe to put them or services to offer them, they need to be able to look for alternative spaces, public spaces, where these people can live independently and with services temporarily until we can provide them with permanent support. This is what we have to do. We are, the elected officials of the city and of this region are making progress. The Joint Office of Housing and Homelessness, I think, was a huge step in the right direction. It should have been started 10 years ago. So I just want to say that houseless individuals are human beings who deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, and houseless sweeps do not do that. They don't achieve that goal. They don't match those values. If this is a housing crisis, as the city calls it, it needs to start treating it like a housing crisis. And I would not have displaced the people from the Village of Hope without having an immediate location where they could move to have their needs met. This whole idea of sweeps without an actual solution where people can live temporarily with services is not solving the problem. It's dehumanizing, and we have to stop doing it. We must decriminalize houselessness, and we must find a way to offer these people services, and if it involves, well, my time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia DeGraw.
Okay, we are going to ask one more question and then go to the audience questions. So keep writing your questions on index cards. This next question is from the DSA. A recent Harvard University poll found that 51% of adults between the ages of 18 and 29 in the US do not support capitalism. There is a growing movement for socialism in this country, which can be seen in the huge growth of DSA. Are you a socialist or a capitalist? And what does socialism mean to you? We're starting with Nick Fish.
So I don't identify as either a socialist or a capitalist. And I think labels are sometimes not very helpful. What I do think is important is constructing an economy that works for ordinary people, working people. And so the question of socialism may be a part of the solution, it may not be. But I'll tell you what the kinds of values that I bring to my work, because the question is not about labels, it's about how do we have a fairer society where more people have access to opportunity. We do that by promoting a strong labor movement. Labor is currently under attack. This Monday, in the Janus case, arguments were heard at the Supreme Court on a case that has already been decided because Mitch McConnell stole a Supreme Court appointment from President Obama. And when he stole that appointment, what everyone in the country knew, and that's the Janus versus AFSCME case, everybody knew that that person would decide the seminal case of the labor movement around right to work. And so a stolen appointment is now going to lead to a situation where the public sector unions are significantly impaired. Do we stand for that, or do we stand for a society in which labor has a strong voice, and particularly in the workforce? Do we stand for a society in which we have unbridled capitalism, or do we believe there should be restraints and that government has a role to play to remove the sharp edges? Do we believe there should be a decent safety net or not? Do we believe the federal government has a role in housing or not? These are fundamental questions that go beyond labels, and these are the values which have been driving my public policy.
Thank you, Nick Fish. Nicholas Sutton.
Yeah, I think I do identify as a, let's say, green socialist, democratic socialist. I do think the means of production should be in the hands of the people. Beyond that, I think that's a pretty clear answer, yes.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas Sutton. Julia DeGraw.
So one of the reasons I'm running for office here in Portland is because I'm also very committed to workers' rights to organize and to creating a city that will actually work for the workers and the people who actually live in the city. it is clear to me, I mean, I'm a democratic socialist as well as a registered Democrat, but I'm a democratic socialist because what it means to me to be a democratic socialist is that we need fast change. The slow change liberalism of the city that we've been living under for decades has led to the housing crisis. It has led to a lack of affordability in our city. There are people who are suffering every day in this city because liberal politics has just told us to wait. You know, change is coming, you know, and Bill McKibben, I think, said it really, really well. He was referring to climate change, but I think this applies to a lot of what we need and what we require as working people in this city. He said that winning slowly is the same as losing. We don't have time. And I think democratic socialism and socialist values offer us faster solutions. When you put the power of our democracy into the hands of our communities, I trust you. I trust our communities to get it right. You know, we need to have more community-led decision-making in our city. Participatory budgeting is a really important way we can do that. There's a lot of ways that we can enact more socialist values into our system so that it actually starts serving the people who live here rather than allowing corporate interests and developers to have undue influence. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So capitalism, socialism, I would say right off the bat that I do not support capitalism. I think historically we can see that capitalism supports corruption, gentrification, wealth inequality, income inequality. And it's quite terrifying to see the way that it affects the world. So let me give you an example. Walt Disney is powerful. His wealth, the amount of employees and businesses that he or that corporation has under them, the millions of movies that our youth take in. It's a very smart, almost brilliant science, and it's almost terrifying how much power we we give without any sort of double thinking twice. So in terms of socialism, I do believe in free education. I do believe in encouraging people to graduate. I do believe in access to medical care, and I think that that's all part of making sure that resources, wealth are equitable. In other countries, you can see that the values and belief systems that they have work sometimes consistently, and the systems that we've chosen in America, i.e. capitalism, you can see almost an opposite effect. So when it comes to Democrat or Republican, I think it gets a little bit more sticky. I would say that there's the new Republican and the old Republican Party, and there's the Democratic Party and there's the Liberal Party, and if you sort of see the separation, I would probably, in the current system, identify myself as a little bit of Democratic, but with some Republican sort of views. I would really love to have a team of people that are working on both sides of the aisle to really bring us together and make sure that we're bringing in the right team and the right people to consider everyone in our community. So I would say that is the direction that I go. Capitalism is what needs to go.
Thank you, Philip Wolf. Now we'll be moving to audience questions, and if you have questions, you can continue submitting on index cards.
So our first audience question. Do you support placing the police department under direct community oversight, permanently revoking the license of any officer found guilty of unnecessary violence, a yearly psych conduct evaluation for all active duty officers, and the demilitarization of the police force in regard to the use of military-grade weapons and military-style enforcement tactics? Yes, and I'll repeat that one. Do you support placing the police department under direct community oversight?
The question is to who, I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kenji.
Permanently revoking the license of any officer found guilty of unnecessary violence, a yearly psych conduct evaluation for all active duty officers, and the demilitarization of the police force in regard to the use of military-grade weapons and military-style enforcement tactics. And we'll start with Nicholas Sutton.
Absolutely. I feel in this country we have a dynamic where the police are seen by the average person as the enemy. Now, I have spoken to many people throughout the last several months, and I have yet to find a person who I know personally who actually trusts the police. Now, individually, I am not saying all police are evil or terrible. However, people should not fear the people that are supposed to be protecting them. And the only way we can ensure this is by placing them directly under the watchful eye of the community. So I absolutely support a strong community oversight system, which replaces the ability of the mayor to relieve officers of duty and simply places it in the hands of the people they are supposed to serve.
Thank you, Nicholas Sutton. Julia DeGraaf, same question.
I would like to start by saying that, the job of the Portland Police is to serve and protect the people of the city, right? They're supposed to serve and protect every kind of person from the city. They're supposed to serve and protect the African American community, the all people of color community, all the people of color in the city. They're supposed to serve and protect houseless individuals, those with mental illness, those with drug addiction, those with any number of those problems. And it's really abundantly clear that we have some major problems in the Portland Police. They're doing a poor job of serving and protecting all of the citizens of this city. And I think that a really big step in the right direction would be demilitarization. A really prime example of this is when you look at what happened with the protest after Trump got elected. The protesters that were out in the streets protesting a racist president were responded to with police and riot gear, which seemed like an over-response to people exercising their freedom of speech rights. And I'm going to give myself an extra 30 seconds on this one. And this is, and then you fast forward a little while, and you have the Women's March, and the police officers show up, in their regular gear. They're friendly. Some of them actually wore the hats that women had made, and they acted like they were members of the community in that space. I think we really, if we're going to get a police department that actually treats people and serves them equally, there's absolutely no reason for them to be approaching a civilian population with anything remotely resembling military equipment. I believe in a higher level of community oversight of police officers as well. And of course, the psych evaluations I would support. But most importantly, we need to approach our crime issues in the city as a public health issue. We need more unarmed first responders, who are mental health professionals, who are highly trained in de-escalation to respond to most of the calls that our police officers are responding to. People need assistance and help. They do not need an armed police officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia DeGraaf. Philip Wolf, same question.
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely support all of the things on that list: the demilitarization, the use of the weapons that they're using, the consequences for yeses across the board. When we're relating to the community oversight, I do just want to briefly sort of speak on that, because I was the chair for the Community Oversight Advisory Board, COAB. Because of my experience there, it was the most honest, transparent work that I believe that I've ever done in my relation with the Portland Police. And unfortunately, after that time, I was done, because the police, I realized, had little to no accountability. There are over 1,000 people annually killed by police, and this number is continuing to rise. It's the highest it's ever been in history, and we're not even at the year's end. We're just finishing February, and our numbers are historically high. and no offense, but I feel conflicted. Our mayor should be focused on his role as mayor, making hard decisions, running the city, making sure that people are accountable to what they need to be accountable to, and most importantly, listening to the voice and concern of the people like you. And I understand that this is a huge, huge, huge role. But also taking on the role as a police commissioner to me is a conflict of interest. Because this is someone who is working in the upper dealings on both sides in business behind closed doors. There should be a neutral third-party role that is making sure, facilitating transparently these interactions between our elected officials and our chief and head of police. And I could go on and on and on about this issue specifically, but I really do want to mention that disability is one of the #1 problems where there is a huge disparity of power. We see many, many people who are killed by police, and then those people are given legal immunity and little to no consequence. Plus, they're given paid leave, so basically given money for this consequence. And I imagine that other workplaces and other businesses catching me doing something wrong or illegal would not be paying me to leave and take a break. So this is a huge problem that we need to address as well. And I would take that away. In the mentioning of police showing up in riot gear, I actually have been involved in protests and seen it and experienced it firsthand, and it is a major, major problem. I can see the stop sign, so I'll cut off now. Thank you.
Let me begin by thanking Philip for the work he's done on police reform and accountability. He walks his talk, and I appreciate the work he's done and the tremendous amount of time he's volunteered to the city. I'm actually starting to feel optimistic about some of the long-term reform work that we've been involved with. We have a new police chief, Chief Outlaw. I think she's made a very solid impression on Portland. Time will tell, but I think she's brought a new perspective to policing. And in my conversations with her, I've been very impressed with her deep commitment to reform. The city asked the Department of Justice to come in, and the settlement that ensued was something that we asked for. And we're making progress in implementing the Department of Justice settlement. The mayor and I have now twice worked to kill the 48-hour rule. We thought we had it once, and then we had to kill it again. But that was a practice out of step with national best practice, and I'm proud that I played a leadership role in getting rid of that. We have a new training center. So and we have, I think, a beginning of an important conversation about what community policing really looks like, going back to Tom Potter and going back to Bud Clark. Specific questions you asked. Do I think we should have more community oversight over our police? The answer is I think we should strengthen IPR and we should have greater community oversight. Second question is, should we have yearly psychiatric exams? I think Senator Lou Frederick had that as a legislative agenda item in this session. I don't know whether it passed. It requires a change in state law. Whether it's annual or biannual, I believe it makes sense. On the demilitarization, I think we should be focused on de-escalation. And we have learned some very difficult lessons and important lessons in terms of how we dealt with some of the protesting. And I think the city has something to account for. We should not have police in riot gears looking like Robocops for every single peaceful demonstration. But we've learned, and I think we've copped to it, and the new police chief said she's going to go different route. And the fourth question was, would I support revoking the license of bad actors? Of course, none of us want it. Most police officers actually try to do the right thing. If we have a bad actor subject to due process, they should be fired from the force. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick Fish. And Philip, if I'm not mistaken, you'd like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would like to ask Nick a question about his comments. So you yourself are a civil rights lawyer, and I imagine that you have a deep care for the people and for their rights and for the amendments. But I know that when the protests were happening and the police showed up, there was violence. I saw the 67-year-old woman who experienced blood on her face. There's pictures and videos, police pushing and hitting people, lawyers, just people of the community. So I'm just wondering where you were in all of that when that was happening, sort of behind the scenes and watching that all happen, hoping that they were keeping their good boys on a leash and making sure something was happening. When we were on the streets, I'm a little bit disappointed because I see you as a civil rights leader, I see your enthusiasm, I see your experience, and I'm just sort of wondering where you've been as that's been happening in our community, and especially hearing your your comment about the RoboCop situation seems like a conflict of what's actually been happening. So would you mind just clarifying and responding to that?
And so I think it's a fair question. So what I said was, in the last year, I think the city has learned some important lessons. You've asked me where I've been, and some of those demonstrations, as you know, I was at City Hall. And I don't want to create any sense of false equivalence. But I'll tell you what's happened in City Hall that's disheartened me. 3 of my employees were assaulted by people that came into City Hall, presumably well-intentioned, but then crossed the line. A Muslim American woman was assaulted and insulted. A gentleman who works for me took an early retirement leave because of PTSD. And a third person had to get a stalking order against someone that threatened his life. Now, I'm not generalizing and saying this is the face of resistance or what was going on. But I think what we have learned in the last year is that on all sides, we have to respect boundaries. We have to be able to engage in a more respectful way. And I think there's some very difficult lessons that the police have learned about how to manage, and I talked about de-escalation and a new approach. But I think there are some protesters who frankly also have to understand boundaries. And at some point, City Hall became an unsafe place. And no one who is hissing right now should be defending that. If we care about a safe workplace for people who are public servants, we should not be hissing.
Am I allowed to continue a dialogue, or do you have to continue once I use the 1 token?
Yeah, no, it's just the one question and response.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you. And thank you for your response and clarification as well.
Thank you both.
Okay, our next question is beginning with Julia DeGraw. Given the historic nature of Philip Wolf's candidacy, the first deaf person to run, the question is, what is your view of how best to enfranchise people who are deaf or have another disability here in Portland?
I think that it's absolutely crucial that every single underrepresented member of our community and community groups are better represented within our system. And Philip Wolf's historic run for City Council, I think, is doing an incredible job of making everyone think about this issue in a way that maybe we haven't before. And I think it's really important that, and it's part of my goal as my candidacy, as a city commissioner, if I were to get elected, to ensure that the city does a better job of both hiring people with disabilities and being able to accommodate those needs. I've heard a lot of stories about the barriers to even just getting a job at the city, let alone being able to participate in giving public testimony and in the goings-on in City Hall. So, if anything, I am extremely honored to be running in this race alongside someone who's also trying to make history. And I'm definitely committed to making sure that the city does everything that it can to increase access for all marginalized communities, but especially those with disabilities and who are hearing impaired, especially because it's abundantly clear that the city is not doing enough. So, thank you.
Thank you, Julia DeGraw. Philip Wolf.
Would you mind repeating the question again? I just want to be sure the audience catches it, and I just want to clarify as well.
Yes, given the historic nature of Philip Wolf's candidacy, the first deaf person to run, the question is, what is your view of how best to enfranchise people who are deaf or have another disability here in Portland?
So before I respond, thank you. Before I respond, I just do want to clarify the term hearing impaired is a negative, has a negative connotation and is oppressive. It does root from hearing privilege, and it's supposed to be, oh, they're hearing impaired. And what actually I think is most important is that we have equity, especially in the terms that we use. And instead of using pathological terms to describe people and medical views of describing people based on their hearing loss and the pity that sort of comes with that and the view down upon the deaf community just because of that disability, this is the exact reason why I'm running for City Council. City Council is itself just underrepresented. It's full of ableism. It runs amok within our city, and you can see it pretty much in any system that you find in our city. So in terms of finding the best ways to break that and start it, number one is me running for this position. There's no other candidate in this room who can match the needs of my community. And as both a deaf man and a gay man in this community, I have compounding experiences that allows me multiple perspectives. Within the deaf community ourselves, we have a beautiful diversity, a hard of hearing community, the deaf-blind community, and the deaf community. Whereas the term hearing impaired sort of puts us in a box and you lose the richness of that. Definitely have a little bit of a reaction, and you can see the hearing privilege through the hearing people's reaction. You can see my reaction compared to someone else, and we need to find the best ways to not only preserve deaf history and deaf culture, but to bring that up to people who maybe are ignorant about it, who maybe themselves just are using sign language for themselves and saying, oh, I can represent the deaf community, look at these signs. And instead, I am a member of the deaf community who can represent those communities, and that's what I plan on doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Wolf. Nick Fish.
So first of all, I just want to say I'm honored to be on the stage with someone with the first deaf candidate who's made a run for city council. And I can tell you that even before Philip decided to run, he's been making a big difference at City Hall. He's a frequent visitor, frequent testifier. He's a passionate person around lots of issues, including police reform and accountability. And every single time our technology fails, meaning that deaf people in the audience or at home on Channel 30 can't actually watch our proceedings, Philip is the only person who stands up and says, time out, we have to stop until we fix it. So thank you, Philip, and thank you for running. The question that you've asked, though, goes beyond Philip and his historic candidacy and goes to the question of how we remove barriers. How do we remove barriers in our community so that people that have a disability have access to the same opportunities as everyone else? And I'll give you one example. A category of people underrepresented in city government, in fact government across the country, are people with intellectual disabilities. And it's been chronic and historic. So we heard about a program up in Seattle where the mayor said that we're going to create positions for people with intellectual disabilities, welcome them into the full family of employment in the city. So I went up and spent a couple days meeting with the mayor, and I found out about the program. Locally, it's done through something called Project Search, which is one of a number of nonprofits. And through Project Search, we have now, with my bureaus, the city's utilities, created opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities. We've reclassified jobs. We're not putting people in the shadows or doing meaningless work, creating meaningful work, integrated with everybody else in the workforce. I would like to see the city of Portland become a model employer for people with disabilities, and I will do my part to make sure that people with intellectual disabilities feel welcome.
And
Thank you, Nick Fish and Nicholas Sutton.
First of all, I want to join all the candidates in saying I'm honored to be here on the stage with Philip. This is a historic run. I'm glad to be part of it. Second of all, I think as a candidate, you start to get excited about implementing your ideas, your solutions to solve a problem. And much of the time, there are communities which exist outside of our realm, and we may come up with ideas that we think suit their needs. But I find the best way to solve an issue such as this would be to approach the people who actually have to deal with it, to stop and listen, to reach out to every community who is disenfranchised or does not have access in the same way the rest of us do, and simply ask them, how do I address this issue? How do you feel I can best address this issue? And that would be my approach to any issue that does not directly affect me.
Thank you, Nicholas Sutton.
thank you.
Last time we started to lose track, so.
Our next question is brief and very to the point. Do you support Portland withdrawal from the Joint Terrorism Task Force? Yes or no? We'll go down the line, starting with Philip.
I'm sorry, the interpreter is clarifying the question. Would you mind repeating it, please?
Sure. Do you support Portland withdrawal from the Joint Terrorism Task Force? Yes or no? And we'll go down the line. Philip, Nicholas, Julia.
So I just want to clarify, do I support the withdrawal? Okay. I do want to emphasize clearly the word withdraw in this. To me, it does seem a little bit sticky, and I do want to really emphasize and clarify that the City of Portland does have a contract with ICE and the Joint Task Force. And so this is under contract. And so the first is to break this contract. That's the first step. What we need to understand is that we are not under them, they are under us. We call ourselves a sanctuary city, and it absolutely, very obviously, it's not, because of the existence of that contract alone. So if we use the word sort of withdraw and softer language in talking about that, we're not really making the correct steps. And so I think stronger, stricter language saying rip up that contract, start making real changes, getting rid of these county laws and county restrictions within the police and making real change. And if, for example, I was a police officer, I would say that my job is to protect and serve. And any law, regulation, or rule that comes in conflict with that is a conflict for the City of Portland and does not allow me to serve it. So that's my answer in that.
I would not withdraw today. I think we're safer having two police officers keep their eyes on the work of the Justice Department. But here's my concern. This Attorney General is the worst Attorney General in my lifetime, General Sessions, and he has shown a curious contempt for the Constitution and for civil liberties. If I am presented with credible evidence that state law is being violated, of course, what we're talking about is ORS 181.575, which is the prohibition on collecting information on groups and organizations around the political activities. If I had credible evidence that that was occurring, I would rethink our position on the JTTF. I have twice signed a release that has given me the opportunity to have a secret briefing from the Justice Department, the FBI, the Police Bureau, and all the participants, including counterterrorism people flown in from Washington. In each instance, information has been shared with me that caused me concern about risk factors in Portland around both domestic and foreign terrorism. And the domestic terrorism is just as alarming today. It's a very close call because we have to balance safety and civil liberties. But if it was today, I would not withdraw. But the concern I have is the Attorney General and the positions he's taken on Dreamers, on cannabis, on a whole host of issues. And if I have credible evidence that our police officers are being asked to violate state law and essentially spy on political groups, then I would vote to withdraw.
Thank you. Nicholas Lund.
This is a fairly complicated issue, which I have to admit I haven't probably given as much as I should. That said, I feel in recent years, especially the last few years, there has been a very sharp turn in the direction of federal law enforcement agencies and local law enforcement agencies. If the decision were, brought to me today, well, I would probably give it a few days of thought and consult, people who are much better versed on this issue than I am. However, I do not feel these partnerships have been particularly productive. And until the federal law enforcement agencies can show a better interest in the people of Portland, I think I definitely would lean in that direction.
Thank you, Nicholas. Julia, same question.
Well, the really specific answer was supposed to be yes or no. And so, I mean, the answer is yes, I do support withdrawing from the Joint Terrorist Task Force. As long as the door is open for communicating with this federal government in a way that can incriminate innocent folks, and especially that this law seems to often be used for targeting Muslims and religious minorities. I don't feel comfortable, especially in the era of Trump, with maintaining those ties. We need to be a true sanctuary city. We need to have zero cooperation with ICE as well. And I just don't see how we can get this right if we're continuing to have this partnership.
Thank you. I thought that would be the yes or no one, but so this is kind of two questions put together. So I'll ask in two parts. One is housing a human right? And if so, does the city have an obligation to house its residents regardless of their ability to pay? And then the second is more specifically, do you support the right of tenants to collectively bargain leases, rent, and tenant protections? So we'll begin with Nick Fish.
Could you restate that?
Sure. So the first part is housing a human right? And if so, does the city have an obligation to house its residents regardless of their ability to pay? And the second part is just more specifically, do you support the right of tenants to collectively bargain leases, rent, and tenant protections?
So I do believe that housing is a human right. I don't believe we have an obligation to house people that have the resources to provide for themselves. So if you're asking me, do I think we have an obligation to provide housing to Phil Knight, I would say no. I do think we have an obligation to provide housing to people for whom the market does not serve them. In this country, tens of millions of people are shut out from the marketplace. And they don't have a voice in Washington. They have a voice in Salem, but there isn't enough money to go around. And the truth is, if we're going to make progress, it's going to have to be a Portland and a Portland region solution. Which is why, before this forum tonight, I met with the president of Metro, the county chair, and the mayor to talk about a regional housing bond and a strategy for bringing hundreds of millions of dollars into the affordable housing discussion. I think the moment may be right for us to pass a regional housing bond and really make a down payment. We can no longer count on the federal government to be our full partner in affordable housing. The state government has done some good things, but our tax code right now is out of whack, and they are having trouble balancing their budget. So Portland does have to stand up, and that's why we passed a housing bond, and the people of Portland said they're willing to dig a little deeper. That's why I've led an effort that said we should have 2,000 more units of permanent supportive housing, so everybody with an addiction or mental illness on our streets today can have a home with the services they need. That's why we have to double down and make sure that, as Julia said, we should support not only the Joint Office for Homeless Services, but in this budget, I commit that we will find the $27 million, I will stop, to maintain level funding. I've been told to stop.
Just for the second question, though, do you support the right of tenants to collectively bargain leases, rent, and tenant protections?
If tenants are organized in a labor union and they approach a certified employer, they have the right to collectively bargain. I don't know how collective bargaining would work outside of a labor context, and I'd want to know how that might function. But the hissing is not helpful. The hissing is actually very disrespectful.
So are your answers.
Well, okay, that's good for you. Good for you. To collectively bargain, I don't actually know how that would work. I know in the labor context what collective bargaining means. I don't know it. I don't really know how that works in the tenant. I'm open to having that conversation, but I don't know practically how that would work.
Thank you. Nicholas Sutton.
Yes, I absolutely believe housing is a human. Everybody deserves to have a roof over their head, period. How we go about fixing that is a much bigger problem, but it would definitely be one of the primary concerns I would focus on. As for the collective bargaining of tenants, I feel if the Government, if the local city government cannot apply the pressure necessary to stabilize or regulate the constant rise in the cost of housing, then I feel that that's the only logical step, is for tenants to gather together and essentially use their economic power against the people that are making it impossible to live in this city. So I absolutely support this.
Thank you, Nicholas Sutton. Julia DeGraw.
So I definitely think housing is a human right. We have a lot of political leaders who say that phrase a lot, and yet we still are in this situation where so many people don't have access to adequate housing or housing that they can afford. I think that making relocation permanent and having it apply to all landlords, which is happening very soon, is a big step in the right direction. But it's not enough, right? We need to go down to Salem, and we need to move forward with making no-cause evictions illegal. We need to stop it from happening. We have to staunch the bleeding so that people are not being displaced from their homes. And we also have to enshrine more tenants' rights. The other thing we need to do is go down to Salem and make sure that the city, we get rid of the preemption so that the city is able to pass rent stabilization and rent control measures and policies. That, however, again, doesn't quite get us there. We need to create permanently affordable housing, and we live in a city that has prioritized developer profits over affordable housing for people who need them. And I'm committed to exploring a community land trust model of housing that will permanently create affordable housing to scale so that we can actually house the people in the city with dignity. And of course, I support the right of tenants to organize. I've always supported people's rights to organize. And I think that there's a way that we can do it that's similar to the labor model. So anyway, that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia DeGraw. Philip Wolf.
Yeah, would you mind giving me the first part of the question again? I know it was said that it was 2 questions, but it seemed like it was 3, so would you mind just...
It kind of is 3.
Yeah, so one question was about the human right.
Is housing a human right? And if so, does the city have an obligation to house its residents regardless of their ability to pay? And do you support the right of tenants to collectively bargain leases, rent, and tenant protections?
Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, 2, 3-ish questions, yeah. So in terms of housing as a human right, I wouldn't say that I think that's a human right. I would say that I know with no doubt in my mind that that's a human right. When we're sitting here considering it, thinking, asking ourselves, it should be an obvious answer, that housing is a human right for people. But to really support that concept, for example, if we think about a dog sitting outside that's leashed up in the backyard, maybe it's pouring rain, chilly temperatures, and if the police were to walk by, they may feel obligated to knock on the owner's door and possibly even fine them for animal neglect and for not following their responsibilities as an owner. So now if we apply that same situation to a human being who may be freezing out on the streets, there's little to no accountability in proportion to the other situation. So we should have the comparable amount of accountability, and the hundreds of people that have been dying on the streets is just simply unacceptable, so period. And to answer the second and I guess third question, we really need to figure out a way that we can bring all of these together into one big solution. Like was mentioned before, it's not just one band-aid and one solution, but it is a compound of many different issues, lacks of resources, making sure people have not only the housing, but that it's accessible and affordable, that it's in a location near maybe transportation, and allowing people to function within the city as well without just temporarily placing them around haphazardly. So.
Okay, thank you so much to the candidates, and unfortunately, it's all the time we have for questions tonight. We could go on all night, right?
I was just starting to enjoy myself.
So remember also, you can hashtag anything going on at hashtag resistance forums, and each candidate will now have 30 seconds. I'm sorry, it says 90 and I read 30. 90 seconds for their closing statements, and we will begin with Julia DeGraw.
I've lived my entire life in the Portland metro area, and I've spent my entire career as an organizer and advocate ensuring that people's voices were heard by people in power and organizing broad coalitions to create change. And my goal right now is to shift the political power in the city into the hands of Portland's communities. The city needs to consult with communities from the beginning of its decision-making process, not at the end of its policy decision-making, at the very last minute. And I also want to emphasize that rather than planning for the future and having a vision for our city, for too long, City Council has operated on election campaign cycles. That's really about the time I see them thinking in. And it shows. The city has been growing for the last 10 years, and yet the city has really failed to plan for this housing crisis. We need to be thinking about what the city should look like 10, 20, 50 years from now, and then create plans and policies according to that vision. And City Council needs to be thinking, in the meantime, we also must come up with really creative solutions to our immediate problems that actually work for Portlanders. After the last election, it's really clear that we can't expect any positive change to be coming from the federal government, and it's frankly not looking really promising at the state level either. But I can tell that Portlanders are ready for bold new change and for bold future. And I have a track record of winning against corporate interests and entrenched politicians and winning on behalf of people. And this is why I'm asking all of you to join me in creating a bold new future together for our city. And if you like what you're hearing and you want to learn more, you can visit www.julia4pdx.com. Thank you so much.
Next, Nicholas Sutton.
My decision to run was simply based on the fact that over the past couple decades, I have watched this city become an increasingly difficult place to live. Now, I do not have the qualifications, the degrees, the background in schooling that many of the highly qualified candidates around me possess, or the people who are currently holding office in the city. But as I watched my city continue to degrade and fall apart, I have to ask the question, can we afford to keep electing these people? I am looking to move in a different direction. Whether or not I am the best candidate is up to you to decide. But I hope strongly that you will consider my arguments. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas Sutton. Nick Fish.
I want to join all my fellow candidates in thanking our hosts for organizing this forum. Thank each of you for coming out on a frigid evening to be part of this. And I want to thank the other candidates up here for having the courage of their convictions and running for office. This was not an easy time to be in public life. I think it's actually the most important time to be in public life, given the extent to which our values are under attack. But I think anyone who steps up and says they want to serve deserves our respect. So our values are under attack. And it's not just the dreamers in our community. It's not just houseless people and people struggling. It's not just low-wage workers. It's not just people that would like to be left alone so they can smoke cannabis. It's not our immigrant communities and Muslim Americans who feel targeted. It is a wholesale assault on Portland values. So how do we respond? I believe we respond by turning to people who have the experience, the relationships, and the progressive values to help us through this period and move the city forward. I could talk at length about the things I'm proud of doing in City Council, bringing people together to solve problems, but I would ask you to judge me on the basis of the people that have stood up for me and said that they support me. Senator Jeff Merkley, who is our progressive voice in Washington. Abel Wardley, who has fought a lifetime of trying to bring police reform and accountability. Portland's teachers, construction workers, janitors, grocery clerks, city workers have all said they will stand with me Israel Bayer, who's done more for the houseless movement and affordable housing than anyone I know, is standing with me. Tonight I'd be honored to earn your support and another term on the City Council and my website, which is not quite as well done, I think, as one of my opponents, but we're playing catch-up. My website is nickfishforportland.com, and I think, excuse me, Philip, I didn't, two of my opponents. I haven't seen Nicholas yet, so I don't want to get sideways with him. And it's nickfish4portland.com. Please check it out, send us a comment, and I'd be honored to have your support. Thank you very much.
Philip Wolf.
Thank you. So maybe tonight you may have noticed that I do not physically have a voice, but I absolutely have a voice. I know that in this situation I can provide the best representation for the people in our community, deaf, blind, hard of hearing, disabled, and other marginalized groups. I served on the Commission of Disability for a number of years. And my goal is that Portland continues to work on the disparity of service accommodations that we have here, and including changing the leaders and the regulations and the laws that we trust and that we follow, and starting the reform on that level. I'm not just a Portlander, but I'm a member of the LGBT community, and having all these intersectionalities gives me a vision for connectivity within our community. To be honest, to say who the best representative for this new, bold future that I think that we all support for our community is the reason that I'm running and the reason that I wanted to share my position and my feelings with you, because I feel like it's time. I feel like this is my chance. And some of you may be thinking, how will a deaf person communicate? How can you run for office? How can you network? We have technology, we have accommodations, and we have things that I've already experienced and visions that many of us already have to move our city in a great, healthy direction. And I wouldn't say, I don't want to use this as a chance to say anything bad about my other candidates, because quite honestly, if I was elected, I know that I would work closely as a team with all of the people and other candidates to make success. So this run is a dream of mine, my goal. I call City Hall my second home. As it's been mentioned, I'm always there, I'm always visible, and just trying to bring new perspectives and bring new views and thoughts to the discussions that we have. Most people have never seen someone standing up front signing their thoughts before, so just that experience alone is amazing. So if I could go on and on about deaf history and deaf culture, hopefully that would give people a better understanding of how we've been dealing with hundreds of years of discrimination, and why, when we had the Milan revolution for linguistic recognition for American Sign Language, we started. So I think I've gone, can I add my token for my ending? Is that cool? Okay. Yes, I just love you all so much. So anyway, I just really wanted to make sure I had time to say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to the candidates for being here, for being willing to sit with each other at a platform like this and honor each other and still talk about the tense, powerful topics, and not so much against each other, but still feeling the sparks and the great energy between all of us. So it means so much to me. This was a beautiful, diverse, amazing group and a conversation that we had. So my website is www.philip4portland2018.com, and I do have interpreters here, so please feel free to come and talk to me. I do have business cards available. I would love to see each of you more often and know all of you better. I know I see my time. It's time to go home. I see someone telling me it's about time. So thank you.
Please join us in thanking the candidates for their candor tonight. And for their willingness to serve the public. Please also thank us and join us in thanking First Unitarian Church and the volunteers and groups who put this event together. Information about each group is available on the Facebook page and their individual pages, as well as at the back of the room.
This forum will be available for on-demand viewing at each of the hosting organization's Facebook pages, Remember to share with your contacts that you think would be interested.
This concludes the Resistance Forum for City of Portland Commissioner, Position 2. Please remember this is the third of our 4 resistance forums. The final forum, which will be Portland City Council, Position 3, the position currently held by Dan Saltzman. Due to weather, that event had to be rescheduled and will be on Tuesday, March 27th at the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization. See Facebook for the details and make sure to join us for what promises to be a spirited forum.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and make sure to get involved in your local democracy. Your efforts can make a difference in our community, and your vote matters in shaping our region's future.